Well, welcome to Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. As you see, I have another guest with me. I'm glad you're here. I'll introduce him in just a moment and then let him talk about himself because he knows himself better than I do. And so one of those things that I would encourage you to do, if you could, if you would like, subscribe and share as we are trying to help pastors. We're trying to help church workers gain awareness to some of the challenges that we have in ministry, but also help and be preventative in some of the strategies that we have to build their positive mental health. As we know that building positive mental health combats the negative mental health that we all deal with in ministry. There's stress, anxiety, and depression, and a myriad of other lovely things that happen and occur in the helping profession, which leads me to our guest, Joel Walton, who is in that helping profession because he is a therapist. And I'll let him tell us a little more about himself just as a way of introduction. So Joel, thanks for joining me today. And would you please just kind of introduce yourself, kind of like what your title is, if you've given yourself a lovely title, and a little bit about the organizations and that you deal with and work with, and some of the self stuff that you have started and founded.
Well, first off, I'd like to thank you for having me here today. It's a real honor. As you said, my name is Joel Walton. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in California. I primarily work with people of faith, and that covers kind of a broad spectrum of denominations and things. I am involved in private practice. I work with individuals, couples, and families, kind of like a general practitioner therapist that is more tailored towards people of faith. And I also work at a large Christian church where they have, it's a training center where I am a clinical supervisor, and we have 20 interns, associates that are all working towards getting their hours for licensure. So that's basically my background. My wife and I recently published a book, Words to Love By, which is a book for couples. And then I work with specific clients, a lot of law enforcement, public safety, veterans, things like that. So that's about what I do.
That's a little bit, right? Yeah, I was noticed the book for those of you who are watching. It is there in the screen, but it's Words to Love By. I would encourage couples, whether you're in crisis or not, to pick it up and read it. It's simple, it's accessible, it's not daunting like a lot of marriage books can be. It's just some practical ways for you to build your marriage. So I really appreciate the work that you and your spouse did on it. So thank you. So you're into counseling. It's what you do. You supervise and things like that. How long have you been in counseling? Let's start there.
I started working about 10 years ago in this profession. So I've been licensed since 17, but I was working before that for ministry in a counseling role.
Now, just in personal conversations, I know that you have had opportunity to provide therapy and counseling for a lot of pastors. What percentage do you think maybe would be pastors or church workers that you deal with?
I probably do about 15 to 20% between pastors and missionaries. I do some work with missionaries and just people that are working within a Christian organization.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. So I've been in not several, but a few different denominations over the years of my Christian walk and in ministry with a couple different ones. And there's a lot of times different ideas about therapy and seeking counseling and whatnot. And I find that in the pastoral world, there sometimes seems to be a hesitancy for pastors to go to therapy or to seek counseling. So why do you think that is?
Well, we could talk an hour on that topic alone. That's very broad, and it's really tough to pinpoint the specific or the one that sticks out. But I was sitting here thinking there's probably 6 quick answers to that I could come up with, and I don't know which one would be in order of importance. But I would say the first one that often comes up is a lot of these pastors don't have the means to afford it. And that's something that we talk later on about what can people do to help pastors. That's definitely one of the things I would like to try to touch on. The other thing I think is that pastors oftentimes have a misguided and unrealistic view of what counseling is. I mean, counseling really is a professional relationship you have with someone that's not going to change. When I say that, what I'm speaking of is when you are working with a counselor, when you're talking to a friend, a parishioner, somebody in your church, a family member, and you start to disclose things that may or may not impact the relationship in some way. They're going to see you differently, is what I'm basically saying. And as a pastor, you're kind of caught in a spot where you're a point of authority, but yet you're also human. And so, with counseling, what you're getting, and when I talk about a misguided understanding, is that you're getting confidentiality. You're getting a professional relationship where you can unpack and work through things. And I think pastors oftentimes feel like they're broken if they go to counseling, and so that I think has a big impact. That they just don't understand having a professional relationship where you can be authentic and work through what you're dealing with. Has a lot of benefits that you don't get with working with other people that are, that know you. And I guess, the typical thing we get with a lot of Christians is that going to counseling must mean I'm not Christian enough. I don't pray enough. Something must be wrong with me. I think with pastors, we get a lot of kind of understanding that they don't feel the counselor understands their position. And so, and for a lot of secular counselors, they wouldn't. So that's why it would be if you're seeking a counselor, find somebody that works specifically with pastoral type situations. The other one is that they kind of have this, I'm a rock, I'm the strength, I'm the one people turn to. If I need help, I can't help others. And that's just totally not, unrealistic, because we all, we read through the scriptures, we hear some of the struggles that Paul was in, shipwrecked, beaten, to the inch of his life, imprisoned. Why would we think anything would be different for us? And then again, I think the other thing is a mindset that Jesus, only Jesus and Scripture. That's all I need. Just pray more, and God will fix me. And we still struggle. This is all. What we're dealing with is primarily relational dynamics within what we're dealing with. And so, I could go on, multiple things, but I think that pretty much encapsulates why I think ministers are hesitant to reach out to counseling.
Yeah, I used to fall into probably that latter one, where you just got to read the Bible more, and God's word is enough. And what's interesting to me is, and it's something I share when I'm talking with pastors who are hesitant. I say, if you break your leg, you're not thinking about it. You're going to the hospital right away. If you need knee surgery or something like that, or even if an illness, whatnot, you go to the doctor and you don't hesitate to do that. Now, there are good doctors and there are bad doctors out there, right? So you try to find the best that will help you. And so I look at even like your profession. You're, in my opinion, a really good therapist. Now, I wouldn't necessarily think that all the therapists that I've met over the years would be good for pastors to go to, or even Christians to go to, because you need to really, sift to that. So I wonder too, if some of the challenge that you didn't mention, but I wonder if, especially in rural communities, if accessibility to even therapy or counseling is even possible, never mind the cost and whatnot. And so I think it's one of those things where we see it and it's more presently available, we might be more likely to take advantage of it. And then it's admitting, like you said, it's admitting that we need it. And that's really hard, especially coming from a pastoral view, is we're supposed to be the ones that have it all together. But the reality is, as you experience in counseling, what I call people spiritually vomit over me as a pastor all the time. And so it's a very unilateral relationship, not as much reciprocity for various reasons. Because like you were saying, if what I share with someone in confidence, in a moment as a friend, even though I'm their pastor, is that going to impact the relationship? And most often it does, even though I do find it valuable to try to create friendships within the ministry. That's how you and I became, what I would say friends, is I was a pastor of a church and you were attending. And I try to break down those walls of this. I'm just a guy who's messed up, and you know that very well about me. So, but God
Well,
is good.
and I think one of the other things that we have to realize is that with pastors, they have a tremendous amount of confidentiality that they carry, and it's a very big burden. It's like a bag. You know things about parishioners and people that are attending your church that other people don't know, nor should they know.
Right.
And so you are struggling with the couple that you've been working with to try to, and then they're now finding out that things have gotten worse, or that maybe there's some domestic violence going on, and you're wrestling with, you can't share that information, and so you end up having to carry so much of the of that in confidentiality, and I think that does wear on us.
Yeah.
There's like an allostatic load that we just kind of build up, carrying that stuff that we really can't deal with, and that's where something like I had a pastor reach out to me out in the middle of a small little town in Nevada. Just somebody I knew, there was another pastor, said, "Hey, reach out to me," and he had a couple kids in his community commit suicide, and the community was looking to him for answers. And so we walked through and talked about, it wasn't really, it was just kind of a one and done kind of session. I do that oftentimes with pastors. Yeah. And he just couldn't, where was he going to turn? Who's he going to talk to? Everybody wanted an answer from him. So anyways.
Well, you mentioned something that I would like to just take a moment and encourage pastors and church workers. Understand your limitations. The reality is, and qualifications. Let me use that term too. You have a limit to your ability. Most of us have limited, as pastors, limited training in real counseling. And right. So you mentioned domestic violence or something like that. If that was the case, if I'm counseling a couple, how quickly can I get them to a professional? How quickly can I get them to somebody who can really help them and get into their trauma and whatnot that I don't have the ability to do? I often joke that when couples come to talk to me, I said, "You get me for 4 weeks, 4 times, and if nothing changes, then I gotta send you on because I've reached my right. The end of my abilities." So.
Right, yeah. Right.
So, what are some challenges, maybe in your experience, that you've seen facing pastors?
Well, I think one of the things you just mentioned is that I think pastors oftentimes wear too many hats. They try to wear too many hats, and especially when you get into smaller congregations. They're the maintenance guy. They're the multimedia person. They do all the social media, put together the sermon. They do the worship. And so they start having to carry way more than they should. And I think that just really runs to burnout, because then they goes into the next one, that that tendency to want to control things beyond their pay grade, and then it's like, well, if it's all going well and God's really blessing me, everything's going to just it's all going to land jelly side up, which it doesn't. And I think that's a common dynamic. That same thing, that kind of that misunderstanding of what their role is as a pastor, needing to have all the answers. Well, where does the pastor go when he's struggling? Because everybody has times where they're dealing with crises of faith and whatever the world is bringing to them. And then I think the other thing is that I think pastors oftentimes will build an identity around whether people like them. How am I seen? Am I liked enough? And that's got to be a very hard thing, instead of just doing what they're called to do. And we're all human. We all want to feel like we're valued, and that's a real dynamic. And it's kind of hard to measure, where on the spectrum do we fall into that? Because I think we can lean too far one way or the other. We can get to the point where we're callous, no care. That's not good. And then we get to the point where we're like really needy and we need everybody to validate us. That's not good. So somewhere in the middle, and that's a tough one, because it's different for each person. So those, I think, would be what I think are, again, we could talk for hours on all of the things that are facing pastors. And I mean, you could talk to this more, and a little bit more on the darker side. Pastors are people too. They deal with, issues of the flesh. They deal with, sins. They deal with addictions and all kinds of troubling. I mean, I've worked with several pastors that have been in affairs. I've been in, and it's, it's sad, but it's the reality, and we need to help people, heal and restore them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have a pastor friend, and I've quoted this often, and I find this to be somewhat true that senior pastors, especially, are some of the most insecure people that you'll ever find.
That's true.
Uh,
I didn't
and
say that.
yeah, and so, right. Well, and so the reality is we really do. What drives us often is that approval. And again, and then you couple it with what we would consider a sacred calling. And what we're doing is what we would consider, it's not just a TED talk on a Sunday morning, right? We elevate what we're doing because we really believe there is eternal ramifications in our work. And then if you don't feel like someone's liking what you're doing, that just compounds not only your natural tendency to want to be approved, but now you feel like you're failing God too. And so it's just it's these things that are challenging too. So in this idea of what is challenging, you mentioned several things, the different hats that they wear. And so how might church members help pastors and church leaders?
Well, I think church members need to be aware of the limitations that pastors are facing. You know, pastors need to be willing to be seen as vulnerable, but they also don't want to be seen as weak. And that's a hard thing. Like, where do we instill that? How do we instill that? Is that something? Is that a direction by which the pastor should be up there on Sunday advocating for himself for people to do that, or is that really more of church leadership that needs to step in and work to remind people of what pastors are dealing with? And so there's different, and of course different denominations and the structure of the church will dictate a lot of that. And if you're dealing with the denomination, that's something that really needs to be, I think, oftentimes denominationally driven. But I think there's got to be a way in which members have a better understanding, just like we would talk about police officers and what they go through, and they're dealing with constant problems, and how do we get people to understand that? That's really a good question. I've not found an answer to what is the best linkage to make that actually happen. I'd really like to get some ideas from you on that, because that's kind of one of the things that when I'm talking with pastors, it's like, well, how do I get my I have pastors that come in and they tell me that they're really hurt when they put a lot of effort into working on this sermon, and there are a series that they've really dove into and put, they just poured their heart and soul into it, and the people that they really want to hear it don't show up that Sunday, and how they feel like let down, and it's like, I don't even know what that emotion is, and so anyways, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on how best to engage the congregation into that.
Yeah, I think that's some of the challenge. Like an upcoming interview, I'll be interviewing Dr. Greg Walton, and when he and I were talking on the phone a few weeks ago, this is the challenge. How do you get church leadership to understand, and church members to understand that there's an awareness that needs to be brought to their attention, right? And it's really hard because that's the challenge. So the one book that I wrote was really towards church members, but you found that it's really the past. No pastor is going to give this book to their church leadership. Say, hey, how can you build up my positive mental health?
Yeah.
Right, here's a book for you.
I really got it all together, but here, can you help me? It's not gonna. It's just
right, and that's been the challenge now. So I know for the denomination that I am part of, one of the resolves that we just passed in July was to create a greater awareness to the positive, or to the mental health of church workers and pastors. And so I think if denominations start shifting, then they can provide resources that maybe are a little more accessible because it's just more readily available. And if there's an emphasis like that, like our district has a sabbatical toolkit that they just came out with that helps congregations kind of walk through, if it's necessary, how long, how to get through it, and things like this. And so I think that awareness is the biggest thing. I think things like what we're doing here, I'm hoping helps with that, as we can just kind of reach one more person every week or two more and start creating this idea conferences and whatnot, where just some exposure to, it's one of those things where, just a little quick story. When I was working on this doctorate of pastor's positive mental health, thanks to you, by the way, you're one of the people that helped me shift my focus. So, but when I was working on it, I reached out to Dr. Preshold Bell from the Duke Clergy Health Initiative, one of the leaders in pastors' mental health. And they've done a lot of great work, but it's all been very negative, and it's all talking about physical and mental health and how those work together and resting properly. And so I was going to do another piece on stressors and negative mental health. And she responded to me, and this would have been in 2019, I want to say, at this point in time. And she said, there's plenty of work on negative mental health. What we really need is somebody to start doing new work on positive mental health. And so what I find is that there's plenty of awareness of negative mental health out there. And I even think that church members understand that it's a stressful job. But I don't think any of them understand that the simple things that they can do to help mitigate some of those negative mental health attributes that plague pastors. And so now we're just kind of in this kind of new territory. We're trying to get into this area to where we can say, here's strategies now. Let's not wait till they're burnt out. I mean, that's really my heart is let's not wait till we have to deal with it. Let's be proactive, which is, again, in our society, we're very reactive. And so it's very hard to get that idea of forethought and caring for that. But I think something that you mentioned is that pastors, and I want to quote you correctly, you talked about being vulnerable. But what was the other thing you said?
But not be seen as weak.
Yeah, and I think that that's a hard thing for pastors. I mean, how do we express vulnerability and let people know, hey, I'm struggling right now.
Right.
And I think you can find those if you actively seek and create relationship. I think are people in your church that you can cultivate that with that are safe, that don't see you as weak. But it does take a little work. I mean, you've got to create relationship. It's not easy when you're in the pastoral role to just hang out with people because most people don't think like us because we're weird.
Exactly. And it's tough because a lot of the churches you've got, there's some tension between board members or whoever the leadership is. And, you're coming into a lot of these denominations that have got people that have been in the church for, 20 years, 30 years. And there's just so many different aspects that you are facing that makes those relationships hard to develop to where you can have that.
Yeah. Like, for instance, I'm in a church that started in 1957, and I think I'm the 21st pastor or something like that. So, I mean, there's a lot of, and the people who have been here a long time have seen almost all those pastors.
Right. And then you get compared to, well, it wasn't like that when Jerry was here. And, so it's like, that's a tough one. And you don't even know how to even take that. So,
you're like, yeah, but you said you didn't like him. No,
exactly. It's kind of like when companies, upgrade their software, like they want to change their enterprise suite, and then they because it doesn't work right, that it doesn't do what they want it to do, and so they get a new one, and then they immediately start talking. Well, it's not working like the old one did. It's like, well, you mean the old one you didn't like?
Exactly. Well, if people weren't involved, everything would be fine.
Oh, yes, right. And
so just kind of to wrap things up, in your experience, what are some maybe tips that you could give to pastors to help with their positive mental health?
I would say have a board that you can engage with that will engage in the concept of mental health, for the positive mental health for pastors, and not look at it as that there must be something wrong. That is just like maintaining the HVAC system in the building. I mean, there's certain things you need to do. And that should be something that needs to be kind of top down, I think, driven denominationally or, in some capacity. I mean, the idea of positive mental health is becoming much more acceptable. When we think about counseling and so many people envisioned the, kind of the Freudian sitting on the couch, word association, or laying on the couch, and that's not at all what it's about. I mean, so many people that come in that have never been to therapy or never been to counseling, have such a different experience. Like, well, I didn't think it was going to be anywhere like this. And I think that that the leadership within churches needs to consider that and come up with kind of like an EAP, employee assistance program for pastors, where they can go and get that help without any questions asked. That's just part of the budget. That that they can have that billed to the church, and they can get that. I mean, I think that would be a wonderful start. And then that idea of setting up that so that they can do that ongoing.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I'd say is don't make your job your primary identity, which is really hard, because as Christians, our identity, we can't separate our being Christian, because it's really who we are. Mm-hmm. And then you add in, well, you're now the shepherd, and you've got this flock and this responsibility that you've been called to. But you also need to be able to pull yourself away from that, and whether it's a hobby, whether it's other interests, other friends, people outside of your church, outside of, it's just like law enforcement. It's one of the things when I work with law enforcement, people that are in law enforcement, they end up becoming, that is who they are. Mm-hmm. I am a cop. And they cannot separate themselves. So they hang with cop friends, they read cop books and cop magazines, and they talk cop shop, and that's all they do. And then they wonder why they, have these meltdowns. Well, it's because that's not who you are. That's a part of who you are. And I think that would probably go a long ways to helping pastors to not get the burnout and to help their positive mental health.
Yeah, I find that really important. The identity piece is huge. There's a lot of pastors that I know who really maybe they want to quit the ministry. They've just but they've been in the ministry for 20 years, and we put that you've been a pastor for 20 years on a job application. That means nothing to a lot of organizations, right. And so they feel stuck.
Yeah, and that is probably one of the, if you were to talk about what are the topics that people bring through the door, I'm going to say that's probably right up there. The top three is, I want to get out of ministry because I'm not getting my needs met. Right. It's not, I'm not feeling fulfilled. And then we have to kind of walk through, and there's a certain way in which I kind of approach that with people. Again, it's got to be very specific to the person's view of, their relationship with God, their understanding of Scripture. I mean, I'll see a Catholic priest, and then the next week I'll see a Oneness Pentecostal. Then I'll see a 5-point Calvinist. It's like I'm all over the board with, and you have to kind of know where they're coming from and speak their language if you really want to try to give them a place to going forward. So it's not a one size fits all kind of approach, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because guys want to retire too, but because they don't have outside interests. I know of a guy who retired and 10 months later he went back into the ministry because he didn't know what to do without preaching on Sundays and teaching Bible study. It's unfortunate because we want to, again, obviously as a pastor, I'm always going to be, to some degree involved in ministry, I think, because I look at everyday life as ministry. But I'm looking forward to the day where I can play golf a little more, and roast coffee more, and maybe taste some wine a little more. Anyway, so
yeah, and it's important to have those interests and those outside activities that you draw from, so that's just not the only thing you do. Because I mean, that's a common thing I run into with people that retired. People think about retirement as this wonderful thing that I don't have to answer the phone any longer. And you'd be surprised at the number of people that I have that come in a life transition, which should be a positive thing. Mm-hmm. I'm retiring. Great. But yet, within a couple of months, they're like imploding. Yeah. Because they just never actually thought what that's going to, after, I had a guy last year that wanted to build this wood shop, and so he built the building. He got all this equipment in there, and he retired. And he made 5 ashtrays or something. And after that, it's like, I'm bored with this. It's really but he spent all that money thinking this is really what I'm just going to make furniture.
Yeah.
But it really wasn't what he wanted to do.
Yeah.
So, anyways.
Well, yeah, no, I know that routine is important to us, and if we remove that routine, even though we hate the routine sometimes, we find ourselves floundering a little bit.
Yes.
Well, Joel, thanks so much. I appreciate your insights. Joel is a guy I know I can call anytime, and he'll pick up the phone and be honest with me. So I appreciate that. So I encourage anyone who's listening, Words to Love By. You can get it on Amazon. There's a great review from somebody on there for that book.
Yeah, anyway. I got a doctor gave me a good review. It's also available on audiobook if you're an audiobook person.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's new for you. So that's
Yep.
great. So again, it's real simple and practical. Joel, thanks for the ministry that you do. I know you look at what you do as not just a profession, but you actually truly want to help people and for the kingdom. And so I appreciate that. If you like this podcast or video, whatever you're watching, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, if you need more information about the work that I do, just check me out at ppmhi.org. That's Pastors Positive Mental Health Institute. And there's a lot of information there, and hopefully to do more. So again, thanks, Joel, and have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless you.